Good evening. Let's talk about vampires. Yes, I've invited my friend Bella here, who incidentally was painted by a local artist friend, Wes Flannery. I have several of his pieces because he does monsters just the way they live in my head. But in thinking about vampires, I was like, which one should I pick? Because there have been so many vampire stories that have meant something to me and that have thrilled me. And one of the cool things about vampires is how flexible the mythology is and how they can be really different depending on who wrote the vampires. So, I thought about Salem's Lot by Stephen King. I read that one when I was a teenager, and it still sticks with me. I thought about Interview with the Vampire, that was super popular when I was in college. I thought about the Sookie Stackhouse series by Charlaine Harris. I read those. It feels recent, but it's probably been a decade or so. You know how time gets. Fledgling by Octavia Butler. Let the Right One In by a Swedish guy. His name is John Avide Lindqvist, I think, but I apologize. I don't speak Swedish, so I may have butchered his name. It's a great movie, too. Sunshine by Robin McKinley. Justin Cronin's The Passage. Tananarive Dew's African Immortal series. And even Twilight by Stephanie Myers, which, isn't as praised as it was when it was new, still did something a little different with the vampire story. But, the one everybody goes back to is our friend Bella over here as Dracula by Bram Stoker. And so I'm going to cheat a little bit because I'm going to read you a little bit from Bram Stoker's Dracula. But then I'm going to read you a little bit from another piece too and talk about how these relate. So this is pretty early on in the novel when Jonathan Harker has just arrived in at Dracula's castle and is being welcomed as a guest. And it has one of those really iconic lines in it that Bella did such justice to. I handed to him the sealed letter which Mr. Hawkins had entrusted to me. He opened it and read it gravely. Then with a charming smile he handed it me to read. One passage of it at least gave me a thrill of pleasure. I must regret that an attack of gout, from which malady I am a constant sufferer, forbids absolutely any traveling on my part for some time to come. But I'm happy to say I can send a sufficient substitute, one in whom I have every possible confidence. He is a young man, full of energy and talent in his own way, and of a very faithful disposition. He's discreet and silent, and has grown into manhood in my service. He shall be ready to attend on you when you will during his stay, and shall take your instruction on all matters. The Count himself came forward and took the cover off a dish, and I fell to at once on an excellent roast chicken. This, with some cheese and a salad and a bottle of old Tokay, of which I had 2 glasses, was my supper. During the time I was eating it, the Count asked me many questions as to my journey, and I told him by degrees all I had experienced. By this time I had finished my supper, and by my host's desire had drawn up a chair by the fire and begun to smoke a cigar which he offered me, at the same time excusing himself that he did not smoke. I had now an opportunity of observing him, and found him of a marked physiognomy. His face was a very strong aquiline, with a high bridge of the thin nose and peculiarly, wow, that's easy to say, arched nostrils, with lofty domed forehead and hair growing scantily round the temples, but profusely everywhere else. His eyebrows were very massive, almost meeting over the nose, and with bushy hair that seemed to curl in its own profusion. The mouth, so far as I could see it under the heavy mustache, was fixed and rather cruel-looking, with peculiarly sharp white teeth. These protruded over the lips, whose remarkable ruddiness showed astonishingly vitality in a man of his years. For the rest, his ears were pale, and at the tops extremely pointed. The chin was broad and strong, and the cheeks firm, though thin. The general effect was one of extraordinary pallor. Hitherto, I had noticed the backs of his hands as they lay on his knees in the firelight, and they had seemed rather white and fine, but seeing them now close to me, I could not help but notice they were rather coarse, broad, with squat fingers. Strange to say, there were hairs in the center of the palm. The nails were long and fine and cut to a sharp point. As the Count leaned over me and his hands touched me, I could not repress a shudder. It may have been that his breath was rank, but a horrible feeling of nausea came over me, which, do what I would, I could not conceal. The Count, evidently noticing it, drew back, and with a grim sort of smile which showed more than he had yet done his protuberant teeth, sat himself down on his side of the fireplace. We were both silent for a while, and as I looked toward the window I saw the first dim streak of the coming dawn. There seemed a strange stillness over everything, but as I listened I heard, as if from down below in the valley, the howling of many wolves. The Count's eyes gleamed, and he said, "Listen to them, the children of the night. What music they make." Seeing, I suppose, some expression in my face strange to him, he added, "Ah, sir, you dwellers in the city cannot enter into the feelings of a hunter." Then he rose and said, "But you must be tired. Your bedroom is all ready, and tomorrow you shall sleep as late as you will. I have to be away until the afternoon, so sleep well and dream well." With a courteous bow, he opened for me himself the door to the octagonal room, and I entered my bedroom. I am all in a sea of wonders. I doubt, I fear, I think strange things, which I dare not confess to my own soul. God keep me, if only for the sake of those dear to me. So, this doesn't sound very much like Bela Lugosi when I get the description here, especially that bit about having hairy palms and a mustache. He had a heavy mustache. I don't think I've seen very many Draculas with mustaches, but there is that line, "The children of the night, the wolves," right? And an interesting thing about Dracula, if you've never read the novel, is that it's an epistolary novel. So it's told in letters and diary entries and such. So that makes a difference in some of the perspective. Now, the other piece I wanted to bring to your attention was Carmilla. So Carmilla was written in 1872 by an Irish author, Sheridan le Fanu. Again, I'm guessing Fanu. Fanu? Sure. But that's actually predates Bram Stoker's Dracula. And so even though Bram Stoker's Dracula kind of became like the touchstone of vampire stories, this story came before that and has been shown to actually have had quite a bit of influence. Big difference, though, is that the vampire in this case is female, still preying on a female. So the story has lots of lesbian themes, and when I read this one, which I only just read fairly recently, I was pleasantly surprised by that, and at the same time a little taken aback, because in parts of the story you're like, are they trying to say that being a vampire and being a lesbian are the same, or is it just a coincidence that we have a vampire story with lesbians? And I'm afraid it's too late to talk to Sheridan and find out what he had in mind. But like the Bram Stoker, this is also told in first person. And I'm going to read a piece where she describes Carmilla, so you can get a sense of how those compare. "I have told you that her confidence won me the first night I saw her, but I found that she exercised with respect to herself, her mother, her history, everything, in fact, connected with her life, plans, and people, an ever-wakeful reserve. I dare say I was unreasonable. Perhaps I was wrong. I dare say I ought to have respected the solemn injunction laid upon my father by the stately lady in black velvet, but curiosity is a restless and unscrupulous passion, and no one girl can endure with patience that hers should be baffled by another. What harm could it do anyone to tell me what I so ardently desired to know? Had she no trust in my good sense or honor? Why would she not believe me when I assured her so solemnly that I would not divulge one syllable of what she told me to any mortal breathing? There was a coldness, it seemed to me, beyond her years, in her smiling, melancholy, persistent refusal to afford me the least ray of light. I cannot say we quarreled upon this point, for she would not quarrel upon any. It was, of course, very unfair of me to press her, very ill-bred, but I really could not help it, and I might just as well have let it alone. What she did tell me amounted, in my unconscionable estimation, to nothing. It was all summed up in 3 very vague disclosures. First, her name was Carmilla. Second, her family was very ancient and noble. Third, her home lay in the direction of the west. She would not tell me the name of her family, nor their armorial bearings, nor the name of their estate, nor even that of the country they lived in. You are not to suppose that I worried her incessantly on these subjects. I watched opportunity and rather insinuated than urged my inquiries. Once or twice, indeed, I did attack her more directly. But no matter what my tactics, utter failure was invariably the result. Reproaches and caresses were all lost upon her. But I must add this, that her evasion was conducted with so pretty a melancholy deprecation, with so many and even passionate declarations of her liking for me and trust in my honor, and with so many promises that I should at last know all, that I could not find it in my heart long to be offended with her. She used to place her pretty arms about my neck, draw me to her, and laying her cheek to mine, murmur with her lips near my ear, "Dearest, your little heart is wounded. Think me not cruel because I obey the irresistible law of my strength and weakness. If your dear heart is wounded, my wild heart bleeds with yours. In the rapture of my enormous humiliation, I live in your warm life, and you shall die, sweetly die into mine. I cannot help it. As I draw near to you, you in your turn will draw near to others and learn the rapture of that cruelty, which yet is love. So, for a while, seek to know no more of me and mine, but trust me with all your loving spirit." And when she had spoken such a rhapsody, she would press me more closely in her trembling embrace, and her lips in soft kisses gently glow upon my cheek. Her agitations and her language were unintelligible to me. From these foolish embraces, which were not of very frequent occurrence, I must allow I used to wish to extricate myself, but my energies seemed to fail me. Her murmured words sounded like a lullaby in my ear and soothed my resistance into a trance from which I only seemed to recover myself when she withdrew her arms. So that seductive vampire is here in this one, right? Is here in the in Sheridan's book. And I think that it's actually portrayed a little more strongly here than it is in Dracula, even though the movie versions often give him such a smooth and charismatic demeanor. In the book, he's a little bit more directly a monster than that for the most part. So there you go. I cheated and gave you 2 vampire stories, a little bit of Bram Stoker's Dracula and a little bit of Sheridan Le Fanu's Carmilla, which was written a few years before. I highly recommend both, and maybe both like right next to each other so that you can see how they compare. Enjoy.